You know, we've seen them, we've heard them, loud cries all over the country for change in the way police officers do their jobs.
And those calls are getting a lot louder since the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And right here in Baltimore, the city police department had a head start on reform prompted by the death of Freddie Gray back in 2015. But instead of getting better, a group of rogue police officers took advantage of the chaos and created what may be the worst policing scandal we have ever seen, not only here in Baltimore, but across the nation. WMAR 2 News' Christian Schaefer talked with the authors of a new book about the Gun Trace Task Force to find out what their crimes could mean for law enforcement here in our city and across the land.
After the death of Freddie Gray in 2015, reform of the Baltimore City Police Department was supposed to be happening. Scattered calls for change
all day, we will fight for Freddie Gray.
Started turning into a movement.
We will fight for Freddie Gray. All day, we will fight for Freddie Gray.
In fact, the new book, I Got a Monster, by former City Paper collaborators Brandon Soderberg and Baynard starts with this sentence: Baltimore almost had a revolution. But at that same time, 7 officers on the City Police Gun Trace Task Force were pushing back.
In many ways, what happens in our book from 2016 until they get indicted is that the GTTF serves as a counterinsurgency against police reform.
Push it twice to record.
For example, the addition of police body-worn cameras. Like other members of the police department, the members of the Gun Trace Task Force did have to start wearing them as part of a reform of the department. This is body cam video from a GTTF traffic stop in August of 2016. But if the camera is not on right from the start, there's no way for a future judge or jury to know whether the drugs and the gun found under the visor were there when the officers pulled that man over, or whether the officers put them there themselves. After this stop, GTTF members arrested that man, Albert Brown, then drove a few blocks away and burglarized his home.
They took every measure that went into place to reform the police department and turned it on its head.
More than 7 months after Brown was arrested, all charges against him were dropped. The book details crimes so egregious, money and drugs stolen.
Hey, Sarge. Hey, come downstairs right quick. They about to get it open. The camera rolling. All right, that's just because.
How much you think it is? Yeah, keep the camera on.
People sent to jail for crimes they didn't commit, and tens of thousands of dollars in overtime forged, that federal authorities eventually started a racketeering or RICO investigation. Usually that's for fighting organized crime. This time the feds built a RICO case against men who had sworn an oath to protect and serve. 7 Gun Trace Task Force members all arrested on the same day, March 1st of 2017.
This is a punch in the gut for the Baltimore Police Department, but it's a reality and it's a necessity of reform.
There's that word again, reform, from the now former commissioner of the City Police Department, just after news of the arrest dropped on him, his department, and the public. More arrests would follow, but even that was not the whole story.
And if you start to think of who let this happen, who investigated these people, who didn't investigate these people in the department, it keeps going. It's hard to understand. It's hard to think of it as an idea that like it's contained. It keeps kind of growing exponentially. The more you think about it, the more you look at the amount of cases they had.
Soderberg and Woods say they believe the outrage across the country after the death of George Floyd in police custody has moved people to stop debating whether reforms are needed.
In many cases, the victims that we talk to are the George Floyds and the Freddie Grays who lived.
And start thinking about what should happen.
The same things that people were rising up against here 5 years ago, they are around the country now.
If that's true, they say the Gun Trace Task Force scandal should serve as a warning for other cities.
And one of the things that our book is a blueprint for how not to go forward in the wake of an uprising.
They do support major changes to policing, including, for example, the abolition of plainclothes units like the Gun Trace Task Force.
We need to radically change police. It doesn't mean the kind of reforms that we've seen, which are more paperwork, more lists of bad cops, more sort of use of force investigations. We've kind of shown in Baltimore that didn't work.
You locking me up for what?
It is a scandal that a lot of people might have hoped was already over.
You's a crooked police, that's what you is. You crooked.
But after these authors spent more than 3 years digging into the systems in place in Baltimore, their new book shows how easily they can be used to create a monster.
I hope people can read the book and understand why this matters.
A second book on the corruption of the gun trace task force called We Own This City is being written by Baltimore Sun reporter Justin Fenton. That one is expected to be released next year. I Got a Monster will be available nationwide 1 week from today, July the 21st.